lecture today, and this is focused on water in the Kern River, and that means the length of the Kern River, but particularly for at least a couple of the talks, water running through Bakersfield, at least in part. So this is navigating the waters of the Kern River, a struggle to sustain wildlife and recreation. And we have three panelists who are very well positioned to share history, sort of current status and legal wrangling, as well as what's going on without water in the Kern and the effects of that on fish and other wildlife. So again, thank you so much for coming, and I'd like to welcome our first speaker, and that is my colleague in the history department, currently chair of our department, Professor Douglas Dodd, who's an historian of the American West. Welcome, Dr. Dodd. Thank you.
Thank you. And this talk's been on the calendar for a long time, but well, Maureen knows what it's like being chair these days. The weekend hit last weekend. I'm like, man, I really got to get this talk together. So the last couple of days, I've just been grinding on it nonstop. I was practicing it in the mirror not 15 minutes ago. I'm in solidarity with all the undergrads, who turn in the paper. It's like it's still warm from the laser printer. That's the situation I am in today. But let's go ahead and do it. All right. So I'm going to be talking about kind of the history of water development on the river and its impact on kind of the natural environment of the southern San Joaquin Valley. The talk is called From Bountiful Waters to a Riverbed Runs Through It, Diversions, Ditches, and Dams on the Kern River. Okay. Travelers flying in and out of Bakersfield often saw a t-shirt sold in the airport gift shop, at least back in the late 90s and early 2000s. It read, Bakersfield, a riverbed runs through it. The t-shirt was the brainchild of a CSUB sociology professor, Russ Travis. The slogan was a riff on A River Runs Through It, the title of a 1992 film by director Robert Redford, which was in turn based on a short story in the 1976 autobiographical collection A River Runs Through It and Other Stories by University of Chicago English professor Norman MacLean. His story concluded, eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. I am haunted by waters. In Bakersfield, we are haunted by the lack of water, or by the ghost of our river. It's rarely there, just hot, dry sand under the bridges, but sometimes in a wet year, the ghost reappears, and the glare of white sand is replaced by the reflection of blue sky. Today, I want to talk about the ghost of rivers past. We're familiar with our present river as a kind of a source of dark humor, like the t-shirt, or as a future river that we can envision and maybe want to fight for in courts of law and the court of public opinion. But today what I want to do is look backward at the river that existed before it was changed, before it was shackled and made to water Kern County's crops, when it was a free-flowing river. What did it look like then? What was the region like? And what was lost when that was taken away? Let's begin where the river does, in the snowpack of the Sierra Nevada. Merle Haggard sang, there's a place called Mount Whitney from where the mighty Kern River comes down. It's a good lyric, but it's not entirely true. The headwaters of the Kern lie a bit farther north than Mount Whitney, in the backcountry of Sequoia National Park in a glacial cirque on the western flank of Caltech Peak at about 12,000 feet of elevation in Lake South America. So named because on the map it actually looks like South America. Not really in this picture. The snowmelt flows out of the lake, joined by other small mountain streams. It forms the North Fork of the Kern River. The North Fork flows through a long glacial valley and into the Golden Trout Wilderness of the Sequoia National Forest. To the west, the Little Kern River begins in a basin of small mountain lakes and flows through meadows and forests down to join the main North Fork of the Kern at the forks of the Kern. To the east, just above the high, flat Kern Plateau in the Inyo National Forest, the several small creeks flow together to form the South Fork of the Kern River. The North Fork and the South Fork converge in the Kern River Valley, which was once a vast expanse of meadow and sagebrush ringed by mountains. Flowing out of the Kern River Valley, the river plunged down its canyon toward the valley floor. Leaving the mountains, the river carved a curving path along the bluffs and then reached its alluvial fan, where it separated into the multiple channels and sloughs of its delta. The channels of the Kern Delta eventually led to larger bodies of water, Kern Lake, Buena Vista Lake, Goose Lake, and then into the broad Buena Vista Swamp that flowed ultimately into Tulare Lake. The Kern was the largest of Tulare Lake's tributaries, which included, from south to north, the Tule River, the Kaweah River, and the Kings River. Generally, Tulare Lake was the end of the line, the sink of the Tulare Basin, but in high water years, the lake sometimes overtopped the low ridge of land and flowed into the San Joaquin River and ultimately into the Pacific Ocean. The Kern River and the Tulare Basin had been the home of native people like the Valley Yokuts who lived along the Kern River for thousands of years when they first came into contact with Europeans in the 18th century. Father Francisco Garces, a Franciscan missionary priest, was among the first Europeans to visit the Kern River country and to leave us a description. On May 1st, 1776, his party struck the river. He wrote, "I came upon a large river which made much noise at the outlet of the Sierra, and whose waters, crystalline, bountiful, palatable, flowed on a course from the east through a straitened channel. It being the feast day of St. Philip the Apostle, he called the river El Rio de San Felipe." The war between the United States and Mexico from 1846 to 48, however, marked the beginning of major changes for the region surrounding the river. American conquest and annexation brought the land under the administration of the General Land Office, and General Land Office surveyors reached Kern River in the summer of 1854. Survey preceded the sale or granting of private land. Let me start that over. Survey preceded the sale or granting of land to private owners. The surveyors imposed an orderly grid, called the Public Land Survey System, on the landscape, dividing it into 6-mile by 6-mile units called townships. The townships were numbered and ordered according to their distance from the initial point of survey, in this case, Mount Diablo, just east of San Francisco Bay. As the surveyors measured the land, they made maps, and they compiled field notes, which leave a record of each township as it appeared and as they described it. They show us a snapshot of the river captured at a particular moment in time, the summer of 1854. So, there's the river. Does that look familiar? Can you make any sense out of that? It's a little hard to tell from these maps. Let me add a little context. That square is the campus of CSUB. All right. So does that look right to you? What's wrong with this picture? Yeah, right. Yeah, the river should not be like south and east of the campus, right? It should be north of the campus. But it wasn't, well, there was no campus, but it wasn't in 1854 when the surveyors came, right? And that kind of teaches us one lesson about the Kern, at least as it existed historically, that it was a living and changing river that changed from year to year and from season to season. The movability of the Kern River was the result of its geology. In the valley, the river flows across a tremendous alluvial fan that radiates out from the mouth of the canyon. Geologist and civil engineer Carl Grunsky described the effect of the fan on the delta in 1898. He wrote, "Year after year, the sandy material eroded by the river from its mountain watershed has been deposited in the San Joaquin Valley below the point at which the river emerges upon the plain. New channels have been constantly forming while old ones were being obliterated, and the delta region, thus built up, extends 20 to 25 miles toward the south and west, terminating in a great semicircle formed by Kern and Buena Vista Lakes and the upper portion of Buena Vista Swamp. The central portion of this delta is generally referred to as Kern Island." The surveyors noted the changes in the landscape as well. One wrote, "These sloughs," so the sloughs and channels that were present on the landscape, "these sloughs sometimes terminate very abruptly without any apparent outlet. Kern River passes through this township, but it will be seen by the topography that it runs in a different channel to that of last year. The old channel is now a dry slough. The water of the river is of the best quality. The banks are low, the current rapid and quick, the sandy bottom. The river is wide and on the average about 1 foot deep. Right? So the surveyors noticed that the river changed course over time. Another surveyor wrote, it is often the case that a slough, after running for 1, 2, or 3 miles, suddenly terminates without any outlet. The water is sinking into the sandy soil beneath. We have kind of an example. This is kind of where downtown Bakersfield is located. You can see one of these sloughs, this Kern River Slough, right, sort of terminates here. This would have been an old channel that in a flood event, sand and gravel had built up here and it had been blocked off and a new channel had been carved. And so the river was constantly doing that, sort of moving back and forth across its alluvial pan, with every sort of flood year bringing major changes to the river. You can kind of see the overflow lands here, denoted, well, I guess by the label overflow, and also by these sort of marshy looking illustrations. The lands of the Delta were excellent for farming and ranching. The surveyors noted that, quote, the soil of the overflowed land is decidedly the finest in the township. It is of first-rate quality and produces fine grass during the whole year. That's kind of amazing, right? Everything's dry out, typically. You know, they're starting to dry out now, right? Now that the rains have sort of stopped. But along the river, in these overflowed lands, these are surveyors visiting in July, August, September, and the grass is still there, the grass is still green. Surveyor A.J. Vaughn wrote, the soil of the overflow is first rate and covered at all seasons of the year with fine grass, affording fine grazing for cattle. The soil is well adapted for farming purposes. All kinds of grain would grow well. Judging from the continual moisture of the land, it is supposed to be well adapted for the growing of Indian corn. So land was of very high quality. But in 1854, when the surveyors visited, the Kern Delta was an empty land in transition. In 1854, the land was largely unoccupied. The native Yokuts had been forced out, as Surveyor Vaughn wrote. Along the river, there still remains many dilapidated rancheria of the Indians who have recently left and gone to the reservation about 25 miles distant. But American settlers had not yet arrived in large numbers. Vaughn continues. The ferry, which crosses the Kern River, is situated in this township and is kept by an old man, the only person living within the township. American settlement began around 1860 with a few farms and ranches established on Kern Island. Christian Bona, the German immigrant, was among the first. The early settlers began engineering the river. Thomas Barnes, who settled in 1860, dug an irrigation ditch, but a flood in 1861 swept away much of the early community. Thomas Baker, who arrived from Visalia in 1863, built a levee to protect his property from flooding, and then began to direct the drainage of swamps and sloughs to convert them to farmland. He also led construction of an early canal. He dug a ditch and a head gate to divert the water from the Kern River into the old South Fork, which you can see here on the map, right? Which was one of those old channels of the river that once had been the main stem, but later had been cut off. He planned to dig this head gate to divert water out of the Kern River into the South Fork and to turn it into kind of a natural canal that could distribute water to lands farther south and east of the community. In the 1860s, agriculture in the Kern Delta was limited. They mainly served the subsistence needs of locals, along with some surplus that was sold to mining communities up in the mountains. Grain, vegetables, and livestock were the main products. Transportation was severely limited basically to wagons and mules, which did not lend themselves to the shipment of sort of bulky, low-priced products like grain. Still, by 1870, the small community on Kern Island had gained about 600 residents and a name, Bakersfield. The Los Angeles Star described the town as it appeared in 1870. Bakersfield is situated near the geographical center of the county and immediately below the point where the Kern River leaves the hills and enters the valley. It is free from the overflow of Kern River by a good and substantial levee constructed by Colonel Baker some years ago. The facilities for irrigation are such the water can be brought to any part of the town at all seasons of the year. As the population grew, more land was cultivated and the demand for irrigation water grew. The 1870s brought a boom in the building of ditches and canals to distribute the Kern River's waters to the fields of the settlers. Baker's effort to turn water into the channel of the Old South Fork in the 1860s had not been entirely satisfactory. The flood of 1868 that created the New River had deposited sand and gravel and blocked the headworks that diverted water into the Old South Fork. In October 1870, the Kern Island Irrigating Canal Company was formed by Baker along with Julius Chester and Andrew R. Jackson to build a new canal that would run outside the Old South Fork, and it would be called the Kern Island Canal. The pending arrival of the Southern Pacific Railroad, which would reach Bakersfield in 1874, stimulated efforts to complete the Kern Island Canal project. The construction method for digging the canal was unconventional. They employed an enormous plow designed by William Henry Southern and manufactured up in Hollister and shipped down to Bakersfield. It was pulled by 40 yoke of oxen. And Carl Brunsky, the geologist and engineer, describes how it worked. He said, a 5-foot plow drawn by 40 yoke of oxen was used in breaking ground for this canal. The loosened earth was then spread to right and left by means of a V-shaped scraper, also of monstrous proportions, and being some 30 feet long and 12 to 15 feet wide. As soon as sufficient waterway was thus created to afford some erosive effect, water was turned into the partial excavation, and it rapidly cut out an ample waterway. So basically, this was done to kind of break the soil. Then you turn the river into it, and the river would do the work, right, of eroding out the new canal. The Kern's alluvial fan had a steep drop of 6 to 7 feet per minute, which was very helpful for excavating a canal, but not great if you want to maintain the canal, right? Because it's always cutting away. As a result, they had to install drops about every half mile that would kind of slow down the water and diminish the erosive force to kind of keep the canal intact. In general, however, the Kern's alluvial fan was a great help to reclamationists. As a correspondent from the San Francisco Chronicle observed in 1874, the remarkable slope of the country downwards from the course of the river wonderfully facilitates irrigation. It overcomes all difficulty and makes it easy to conduct the water anywhere. And so they could kind of direct the water all over the alluvial fan. You could use existing old channels, you could dig new ones, but you were working with kind of the natural flow of the water. It made it easy to irrigate this region. Something that other regions around the American West did not enjoy. Bakersfield had some real advantages early on. So this is the Kern Island Canal where it departs from the river. This is Carl Brinsky's diagram of its headworks showing how it's diverted out of the river. While most of the canals were constructed on the south side of the river, I'm getting ahead of myself. Several canals were constructed on the south side of the river. Besides the Kern Island Canal, the James Canal was constructed in 1871, the Farmers Canal in 1873, the Stein Canal and the Gates Canal also in 1873, and the Buena Vista Canal in 1875. So extensive canal development in the 1870s is happening south of the river. Most of the canals are not excavated with the Southern Ditcher plow. That was kind of a limited experiment. Usually the canals were excavated using horse-drawn scrapers. Canal development was also happening on the north side of the river. In 1873, the Beardsley Canal was constructed. It was both the first canal on the north side of the river and the first kind of point of diversion upstream. So it was upstream of the intake for the Kern Island Canal. The Beardsley Canal was constructed in 1873, the Pioneer Canal in 1873, the Goose Lake Canal in 1874, and the Callaway Canal in 1875. Of all the ditches in the region, the Callaway Canal was the most extensive. It was about 30 miles long. It commanded about 60,000 acres of irrigable land. And it was constructed in 1875. It also was tremendously large in terms of capacity. See here. And it had the capability to essentially de-water the river at certain times, which led to problems for downstream users, especially for the other major land empire operating in Kern County, the empire of Miller and Lux. The Kern County Land Company was the company that built the Callaway Canal. That was James Ben Ali Hagan and Boyd Tevis, partners of George Hearst, very wealthy San Franciscans. And basically had these two very powerful and wealthy land empires facing off over the water of the southern San Joaquin Valley. The conflict created by the Callaway Canal led to a lawsuit in the late 1870s that ultimately made its way to California Supreme Court in 1884. The case is famous, you've probably heard of it, Lux versus Hagen. This was a case that attempted to settle the dispute over land and water rights. The case revolved around issues such as riparian rights versus prior appropriation, which were two different doctrines for dealing with water. Riparian rights were the idea that land ownership also entailed the right to use water that was on or adjacent to one's property. It was an idea from the English common law that got adapted or adopted in the eastern states and eventually adopted in 1850 in California. But it was a system that emerged in much wetter climates, maybe not ideally suited to California. Prior appropriation was a doctrine that emerged in the California gold fields, where miners wanted to divert water out of rivers and streams in order to wash gravel and recover gold. And they developed the idea of first in time, first in right. The first person to divert water is the one who has rights to that water, as long as they're putting it to a beneficial use. So those two systems kind of come into conflict here in the Kern Valley. There's another issue at stake too, and that is kind of the nature of a water course, right? Is the river a river or not? Miller and Lux said yes. The Buena Vista Slough is a water course, and because it's a water course, we have riparian rights to the land around it that we own. But Hagen and company said, no, it's not a water course, it is a mere swamp. And as such, you know, the riparian rights don't adhere. So that was another aspect of the conflict. In 1884, the California Supreme Court made its ruling in the case and created a sort of hybrid doctrine that recognized riparian rights but also recognized elements of appropriationism. The two parties also reached an agreement. In 1888, they cooperated to build the Carrier Canal, which would deliver a regular supply of water to the Miller and Lux lands down around the Buena Vista Slough, and they cooperated on building a reservoir on the bed of the old Buena Vista Lake that could then be used to store water to water the lands along the Buena Vista Swamp that Miller and Lux owned. The completion of the railroad in 1874 and its connection to Los Angeles in 1876 kind of solved the transportation problem. You can now get crops to market. And by the late 1870s, there were also, extensive canals to irrigate the land of the region. And so agriculture in Kern County boomed. Traditional crops like alfalfa and meadowgrass for hay were extensively produced. There were huge herds of cattle from Miller and Lux, a major cattle producer. Wheat was harvested, major wheat fields in the Central Valley sent grain around the world. But specialty crops also emerged, especially by the late 1870s with the advent of refrigerated rail cars. These kinds of crops could be shipped farther without spoilage, and in the long growing season of Kern County, it became appealing for growing things like grapes and tree fruit, like peaches and citrus and other things. Of course, all of these things demanded more water, and as more of them were planted, more water was demanded from the rivers. Diversion for irrigation had an impact on the basin's lakes and tule swamps, which had provided habitat for fish, waterfowl, and tule elk. Lady Constance Frederica Gordon Cumming, an adventurous woman from Victorian Britain, visited California in 1878. Returning south from Yosemite, She traveled through Kern County and went on to record what she saw in an 1884 travel book called Granite Crags, inspired by her visit to Yosemite. She described conditions on the Kern River and the surrounding region just as the 1870s irrigation boom was starting to take its environmental toll. Excellent fishing and shooting are to be had on Kern River, and also quite recently on Buena Vista and Kern Lakes, where large trout were abundant and quantities of snipe, duck, cranes, wild swans, and all manner of wildfowl and other creatures were wont to breed on the reedy shores where beaver and otter lived undisturbed. But the diligent settlers have worked their irrigation and drainage work so vigorously that both these lakes, with the marshes surrounding them, have dried up, and the shy, man-fearing creatures have had to seek more remote hiding places. The poor lakes have simply been left to starve, the rivers whose surplus waters hitherto fed them having now been bridled and led away in ditches and canals to feed the great wheat fields. Historian David Igler estimates that as a result of irrigation and development in the Tulare Basin, some 1,200 square miles of sloughs, shallow lakes, and marshes were lost, and with them, vital habitat for migratory waterfowl, fish, beaver, tule elk, and antelope. Picture of Tule Lake as it appeared and then after it dried up. Flooding was an issue in Kern County. As we know, the river sometimes ran over its banks and changed its course. That didn't stop with the advent of irrigation canals. Major floods still happened every few years, 1893, 1914, 1916, 1938. Little was developed in Bakersfield west of Oak Street on account of the flood risk of the river. But in 1944, Congress passed a Flood Control Act that included authorization to build Isabella Dam on the Kern River. When this dam was completed in 1953, it brought the river under control. It eliminated the threat of flooding, and it stored water to be released later in the growing season, which was a big advantage to farmers and growers in the region. The removal of threat of flooding also stimulated development of Bakersfield's west side. Without the dam, the Kern County Land Company's offer of land to the state of California to build the California State College Bakersfield probably would have been much less appealing, and one of the competing locations might have been chosen. The west side of Bakersfield has grown and flourished. Kern County is now a national leader in agricultural production, but all these things came at a price: the riverbed that runs through it. Thanks.
Very informative background on the Kern River that will be a nice entree to Ms. Lois Henry, who has her own news site.
Yeah, except you already stole my stuff.
All of it?
Hi, I'm Lois Henry. I was a reporter at the Bakersfield Californian for many years, and in 2017, foolishly decided to start my own website. It's called sjvwater.org. If anyone wants to ever go there and see a whole lot of stuff about water that you probably didn't know you were super interested in. Okay, so being a solo kind of business owner, I didn't have a lot of time, sort of like Professor Dodd. I didn't eat for you. But this is a presentation that I made for the Sierra Club, and I thought it might be relevant, although there is going to be a lot of history I'm going to flip through because Professor Dodd already stole my thunder on that. Hey, look, you've seen this. It's the watershed of the Kern River. It's huge. I did get a little bit more into the Native Americans. I just think it's really interesting, and we should acknowledge the fact that first in time, first in right. Well, hey, guess what? The arrow on this side over here is the Tabatawagal, who live up in the Kern River Valley, and then the Yokets, who live down here. They're actually distinct tribes. They did do a lot of intermarrying and stuff, but the Tabatawagal have their own very unique language that UC Berkeley has been studying for many generations. Anyway, and I also put this here. This is Bakersfield. It was known as Woilu. It was the original Yokets village. There was also one further up, just right outside the mouth of the canyon, that I have yet to find the name of that. These people are still here, and I interview them and talk to them quite often. This is Robert Gomez. He is the chairman of the Tabatalarla tribe. If you ever had a chance to talk to him or hear his stuff, he's just a fascinating person. We're standing on the south fork of the Kern River right there, and that is Dee Dominguez. She is a Yalambi Yokets, and she is here in Bakersfield and is very active in a lot of the Kern River stuff that's happening right now. So I just kind of like to, you know, set the plate of where we all started. So Father Garces, which Professor Dodd already talked about, but it wasn't just the Rio de San Felipe. I found numerous other names for the river, including Rio Bravo and the name I can never pronounce, La Porciuncula. I'm not really sure. That worked out in a minute. It was named for Edward Kern, who was a topographer who came over in Fremont. And you see this map, and I like to call it the fire hose effect. The Kern River came out of the mouth of the canyon and just went all over the place, which I find really interesting when it comes to current rights descriptions and discussions. There's a really good book called Ruling the Waters by John Littlefield. If you ever want to read up on super, just really into the rights and how they were all established. I don't know if anybody but me really wants to read that stuff. But if you have the old South Fork here, it's really kind of the heart of the Kern Delta rights, which the Kern Delta Water District now claims they are the best rights on the river. And after reading Mr. Littlefield's book, I was at an event and I was talking to some of the Kern Delta guys, and I was like, so really, you guys actually don't have any riparian rights, because this changed in 1862, the big flood, and moved up here. And I was like, so really, all that land is not riparian anymore because there's no river along it, and they did not care for my description of that. I need to change this slide to make it a little bit more understandable. This is the river. This is the Kern River since 1894. They have kept track of the flow of the Kern River on a yearly basis. This is all in acre feet. 1 acre foot covers a football field a foot in depth. So imagine a football field a foot deep in water. That's what an acre foot is, basically. 326,000 gallons, in case anyone wanted to know that. So you can see that the river is very, what we call, flashy. The average flow is 725,000 acre feet, which you can see we don't achieve very often. But interestingly, last year in 2024, we did hit average, and 2025, the runoff is shaping up to be average, which is kind of amazing. The height is 2.5 million acre feet in 1916, and then the lowest was 2015, which is 138,000 acre feet when I was working for the Bay of California. I wrote the best lead ever. I said, according to tree rings, not just that, it was a professor here who gave me tree ring information. They said the river has not flowed this low since Jesus walked the earth, and I can back that up with his data. So best thing ever. You saw this; it was very floody, back and forth. We can talk about Colonel Thomas Baker a little bit if you want. I have a dim view of Colonel Thomas Baker. There was quite a bit of shenanigans that went on in terms of his coming down here and obtaining the land that he obtained that we now bear his name because of. We can get into it if you want to. He was in the Senate. He was also arrested in vice value for secession during the conflict between the states, or the War of Northern Aggression, as my southern husband likes to say. Anyway, so he was in the Senate, and there was a contract. There was already a contract shortly after California was admitted to the Union, and the United States sort of deeded a bunch of its land. They had a contract to a party called the Montgomery Party. They said basically you can have it was almost 400,000 acres when we really looked at it all. If you can go down there and dry up that Tulare Lake, actually what they wanted to do is they wanted to build a navigable waterway like the Erie Canal from Bakersfield all the way up to San Francisco, and they thought that they could do it. They didn't understand that Tulare Lake was the sink. Everything comes down into Tulare Lake. It doesn't flow north unless you get a really big water here. But anyway, so they had this patent, what they said, a patent contract from Montgomery. The Montgomery people couldn't do it. They couldn't do the navigable waterway, et cetera, et cetera. So they said, okay, well, you're not reclaiming the lands. You know, we revoke your contract. And ultimately, Baker got the remnants of that contract without the requirement for navigable waterway, which he helped kind of, in his capacity as a senator, get rid of, and then said, oh, we should forward this contract to this organization in Visalia, which he also did not mention that he had an ownership partnership in. So today's world, I hope, in today's world, that wouldn't be allowed. But all right, anyway, so he comes down to Bakersfield. He builds the levee here. You've seen this levee, and he was trying to, as Professor Dodd said, you know, create, you know, a natural canal here. And the way that he convinced the state engineers that, you know, oh yes, why I've dried this up. Well, he did it during a drought. So he dried up the land, and the land was going to be dry anyway. So it got all dried up. They're like, oh look, you've reclaimed all this land. How wonderful, yay you. But he didn't get the 400,000 acres. He only got about 90,000 acres because the engineers were kind of like, this seems shenaniganry. So he got this 90,000 acres, and then the next year the drought wiped away the levee. And anyway, so it's the nature of the Kern River. So yeah, I've got all the dates here if anybody really wants to look at sort of, you know, Mr. Baker's conduct in the past. And then, yes, we had the conflict between James Ben, Ollie Hagan, and Henry Miller. They've been coming down here and buying land. Also some shenanigans involved in that. Miller is the one that you may have heard of that wrote a, if you could take a boat around a certain area in the swamplands, you could claim ownership of that. So, you know, it was during a drought, so he put a boat on a wagon and he rode it around and got that land, even though it wasn't an inhabitable area. And James Ben, Ollie Hagan is very well known for getting every other section of railroad land, you know, like, and you weren't supposed to get it just all for yourself. So he would have his butler or his maid or his friend or whatever get in all this land in the north. So at one point, this is almost all Hagan land. Now this is the Beardsley Canal that we talked about before, and it goes north of the river. This is kind of up in the, you know, once you go up towards the Shafter Wasco area. And this is what the Beardsley Canal irrigated, all these lands here. And then almost all of this, if you could read it really well, it's almost all Hagan land. And then this is all Miller land. This is Buena Vista. This is out by, say, Button Willow, so that the river comes out here and used to go to the north. That's all Miller land. And you can see the empires they were building. 1875, the Callaway Canal comes in. I'm kind of going over a little bit of this because it manifests in today's world. The Callaway Canal, which is interesting because it started the whole conflagration between Miller and Hagan, is very rarely used in today's world because they have the Beardsley Canal, and it's actually, this is unlined, and it ends up taking, this is where it goes. So here's the river, Kern County Museum. It comes off here, it comes down here by Lowe's, you see it by Lowe's, and then it goes back up. So that's the Callaway, that's the one that started the conflagration between Miller and Hagan, and actually really set California water law. I just like this because these guys are naked. Anyway, so they started fighting in 1877, and then in 1888, the Supreme Court said, they came back and they said, okay, we're gonna rule for the riparians. They actually ruled for Miller, which caused this huge uproar in California because, as we mentioned, it's riparian land is very limited, and if you can't take the water by appropriation and appropriate it to other lands, you basically have completely killed your agriculture business entirely. So everybody got all of it, and I did a little, if anybody really wants to know what riparian versus appropriative is, it's my own little dumb thing. Anyway, so they had special sessions of the legislature to, you know, harump around about that Supreme Court decision. But what they said was, look, you can have we think the riparian in this instance trumps the appropriation, but prior appropriation trumps just anybody coming along and taking the water. So they kind of did this hybrid ruling. And ultimately what ended up happening is Henry Miller and James Hagan, had fought so long and spent so much money on lawyers that they decided to make a deal. It's called the Miller-Hagan Agreement, and it is still in place today on the river, by the way. This is my state went into tizzy. So let's see, how does this work? Okay, so the Miller-Hagan Agreement, which is still in play today, this is how the river continues to operate. Up there by Hart Park is the first point of measurement. So what they do is, and after Isabella was put in, they do a computed flow. Like what would be the natural flow of the river if Lake Isabella wasn't there? So they do a computed flow of what is actually in the river and then what it should be there at first point. And under this agreement, from March to August, so we are currently in Miller-Hagan season, from March to August, 1/3 of the river would be given to Miller. It would be delivered to Second Point. This is out by Enos Lane. They would get that river undiminished. So that means, whatever it is at first point of measurement, they get 1/3 of that. I can't do math. So 1,000, and they measure it by CFS, by the way, cubic feet per second. So some things are in acre feet, which I explained, and cubic feet per second. If you envision a basketball as a cubic foot, and you're standing on the side of the river and 1,000 basketballs per second are going by you, that's kind of how much the water is. Anyway, so if it's 1,000 feet CFS up there at first point, what is 1/3 of 1,000? I can't do math.
300.
333. Then they have to get 333 CFS here. And of course, the riverbed soaks up a lot of water and you have evaporation and all that kind of stuff. So all of the different water users at first point were like, that's a lot of water that we have to give up to Mother Nature. We don't like that. So they built the Carrier Canal down here. I can't do it. Okay, so the Carrier Canal comes off. This is like, say, about Hart Park, so you can kind of envision this is getting down into Oildale. Carrier Canal comes off here, and it goes down to here. And then what ended up happening, which is why we're having these big fights now. Okay, so Hagan became the Kern County Land Company, and then the Kern County Land Company became Tenneco West. Tenneco West owned it. And then Tenneco West ended up selling out, later we'll get to. But anyway, Tenneco West in the 1960s, they were like, hey, this is costing us a lot of water, during Miller-Hagan, we don't like it. So they built this right here, which is the river canal. You see that it's on the south side of the river, and you see it by by Coffee Road, Drugotti's. You see that river that's going by there. That's called the river canal, and it's concrete line. So they can shunt the river off here in the Carrier Canal and sort of boost it through here and take it down there. So it costs them a lot less water, but that dries up the river here. It completely dried up the river. So in the 1970s, the city was growing, and it looked at why are we having a dry river all of a sudden? This is a problem. We're getting a little bit nervous about it. And so they sued Tenneco West. This is just fun stuff. I just like this headline. There were no roses, there was no jail, and hope died. Anyway, so they sued, I'm trying to get to this, how this all works. Okay, so they sued Tenneco West. Oh yeah, there was uranium mines on the river, by the way. Okay, they sued Tenneco West in order to say, we want some of that water. We got to have some of that water for our future growth of the city of Bakersfield. And so Tenneco West made a deal with them and said, okay, you can buy it. You can buy it for, I think it was $17.9 million, which is a steal in today's world for that much water. So Tenneco West sold basically all of their river holdings to the city of Bakersfield in 1977 for $17.9 million. The right that the city has is, I can't remember what the right is, how many acre feet they get, sorry, because they have like a series of different rights and it kind of adds up. But they own the riverbed from Hart Park to Enos Lane. They own all of the structures within the riverbed, and they own like you know, the sides of the river, the banks of the river. They inherited the record keeping, and they are in charge of the sort of the distribution. You know, like all of these canals, they are the ones that run the canals, the head gates. So that's what the city ended up getting in the 1970s. Kern Delta turned around and they threatened to sue the city because they wanted a piece of it. So the city sold a piece of that to Kern Delta, and then North Kern, which took over all of those lands that I showed you that Beardsley has. They said, look, we've got to get some irrigation too, but Kern Delta was afraid that they would take all the water, so they only have a contractual right. Sorry, it gets really confusing. So you've got the ownership of the river is the city of Bakersfield, Kern Delta Water District, which is to the south. North Kern has a contractual right to use the water, and then the second point users further west is Buena Vista Water Storage District. So those were the four main rights holders, and then the Kern County Water Agency bought a high flow water right in 2001, and now you've got Rosedale Rio Bravo bought a right that's above, it's actually on the south fork, it's above Lake Isabella. So there's 6 owners of the river. That helps anybody. Okay, so one here. So to pay for the river, the city sold bonds, and to pay for those bonds, it sold North Kern and a couple of other districts some water in long-term basic, what they call basic water contracts. Those came up in 2012. So I'm getting to why we don't have water in the river. The city wanted to take that water back, because those were long-term contracts. They had a start date and an end date, right? No, wrong. They wanted to take that water back and put it in the river. But then North Kern sued and said, according to the contract, you have to have a project to take that water back, and running it in the river is not a project. And they went fighting, and they got to Ventura. This all happened in Ventura County, and the Ventura judge found for North Kern, said, nope, you don't have a project. Running water in the river is not a project. So that water is still kind of tied up in these contracts. There's another pot of water that North Kern sued Kern Delta and said, you're not using all your water according to your rights, and we want some. And a judge ruled in 2007, yep, Kern Delta, you're not using all your water. California has a very strict use it or lose it rule, so you lose a chunk of your rights. But I can't determine who gets that water, so it has to go to the State Water Resources Control Board. It is still there. I actually asked them if they were having some sort of a hostage situation, because it didn't seem like the rights group was actually working on this anymore. The board didn't care for my terminology. So that's the forfeited water. So you have the two pots, basic contract water, and then you have the forfeited water. This is what the river mostly looks like today. Now you have this new group that has been fighting for the river called Bring Back the Kern. They've been holding a lot of different protests, etc. Then in 2022, they sued the city of Bakersfield for dewatering the river. They're saying, look, you move this water all over these places, but there's no flows for the public trust. According to California, even though people own rights to the water, the state actually owns all the natural resources still as a kind of a function of being a state, and they hold it in trust for the public. It has to be put to the highest, most beneficial use. That used to always be irrigation and municipal uses and industry, but environment and public access are kind of coming up in those rights, and so that's what this lawsuit is about. Okay, stuff that just happened Wednesday. In March of 2023, as this lawsuit was going on, we had this huge water year, brought fish back to the river, all throughout the whole stretch of the river. So Bring Back the Kern filed for an injunction at that time, which was granted in October of 2023. The injunction was that the city had to maintain enough water in the river to keep those fish in good condition. And that was based on California Fish and Game Code 5937, which has been actually part of, in various iterations, part of California water law since the gold rush. Oh look, The ag districts that own the water rights appealed that injunction, and the injunction was stayed in May of 2024. This is what happened. This is actually in September or late August. One day the river was flowing and teeming with fish, and literally 2 days later it was completely dry. I took these drone shots 4 days apart. This is the same spot. So that's how this river goes, up and down. Okay, so where are we now? All right. So the state action, they started hearings in 2021. I literally did ask the water board board members, they're big wigs. I was like, have these people been taking hostage? Where are they? They started their hearings in 2021. They paused them and said, we'll reconvene at a later time, and here we are in 2025. Nothing's happened. Basic contract water, still under appeal, still in court. 2022 is the lawsuit. That lawsuit is still ongoing. The next trial date is December of this year. December 10th, I think, is the trial date, so put that in your docket. 2024 was the injunction that was granted, then it was stayed in May of 2024, and on Wednesday, the 5th District Court of Appeal reversed the injunction, which means they can't mandate that water stay in the river, and it's, I just wrote about it if you look on SJV Water.org. This ruling that the 5th District came down, and it's a published ruling, which means it can be cited as a legal precedent. It not only stated that that injunction had to be reversed, it also said that in public interest lawsuits, like this one was, you have to pay, the person seeking the injunction has to pay the full potential cost of whatever the harm might be to the person being enjoined, in case the injunction is found to be faulty. So just to sort of put this into perspective, so trying to come up with an analogy that makes it easier. If I say, Dr. McNeish can't, and I get an injunction against her, like she can't teach about fish. I don't want her to teach about fish. That's bad for me or whatever. And some judge says, yes, she can't teach about fish. Well, she makes her living teaching about fish, and she makes $1,000 a day teaching about fish. And somehow that injunction goes into effect for 5 days, but then it's found faulty and it's retracted. She's out $5,000, right? That's not fair. So before I can even get the injunction, she has to say, I'm going to be out $5,000, and so that's not fair. So I have to put up that $5,000 as a bond. That's what that means, right? So that if it's if it's found to be incorrect, she gets that money and she's not harmed. And anyway, in the case of the Kern River, the ag districts have said that for the 5 months that the injunction was in place, they lost $5.7 million. $5.7 million. That means, and that's just for those 5 months. That means that if they wanted to seek another injunction, the plaintiffs would have to put up multiple millions of dollars, and they have to pay that. Even though the 5th District's appeal, I was like, this is not correct. They said, oh, you only have to pay that if the injunction is found faulty. No, you have to pay that up front. That is a bond that is held in trust by the court. You can't just trust people, right? I mean, it's, you don't just go, oh yeah, if this injunction is found faulty, I'll pay you your $5,000, no problem. That's not the way it works. You have to put that $5,000 into a trust plus an extra 10% for insurance and court costs. So anyway, the bond issue, I think, is probably going to be appealed to the Supreme Court because there's a ton of public interest lawsuits out there, not just on the river, and not just on the environment. Labor issues and all kinds of stuff, right? And if you have to put up that kind of bond money, what public interest group is going to have that? I mean, it's a David and Goliath thing because the public interest groups are usually fighting against developers or, industrialists and stuff like that. So they don't have the same resources. Anyway, so that is where we are now. Oh, and these are just fun facts. All these things have to do with the Kern River that people don't know. The end. That's it.
Yeah,
sorry.
1 second left. Thank you so much. dead fish, and a project she worked on with students, researchers about this to try to gauge the effects of a lack of water, now that we're pretty well aware that has been a lack of water in the river. And Dr. Rae McNeish is a professor of freshwater biology here at SJV Water.
Thank you. I have a very large file. So.
Oh. it's an 87 feet wide. You're good.
There's videos in it too. I think that's part of the
I'm sure.
of lots of the dead fish.
It's going backwards.
Oh, there we go. All right. So as kindly introduced, I'm Dr. Rae McNeish in the Department of Biology here on campus. I'm a freshwater ecologist. I'm going to talk about the ecology of the river, kind of picking up right where was left off in the previous talk. And this is really great because the Kern River is in crisis. All right. And so what you're looking at right now is field footage that my lab team and I took of the when dewatering of the river happened just at the end of last summer. And what you're seeing are actually hundreds of fish. You can just see the big ones. But there's hundreds and hundreds of fish that were trapped in this refugio pool. A refugio pool is a remnant of water that's disconnected from the flow of river and is very shallow. Okay, so I don't have a lot of introductory stuff related to the Kern River because I predicted that there would be quite a bit, so I'm glad about that. But just a few more things. Ecologically, as was brought up, it's a perennial river, historically speaking. That means that river water flows through the channel pretty much year-round, except for very extreme drought conditions, historically. Flow sources are stormwater, snowmelt, and dam releases. In 1987, portions of the river was classified as wild and scenic due to its beauty, its recreation, and also the connection with indigenous peoples. Okay, and the river flows through several wilderness and parks and sierras. Okay, the North and South Fork collect here in Isabella where the dam is, and then this part here is the Lower Kern River. Okay, it's very important to have water in your river channel, not just to support the wildlife and also the humans that want to interact directly with the river, but water in a river channel also means water in the ground, because water in the river will percolate to the groundwater and reach towards groundwater aquifers, which we also extract to support human societal advance. The Kern River today and also historically supports a diverse wildlife all throughout the river watershed. Okay, many of these species are rare, they're endemic, found only here. They're listed as threatened or endangered species. Okay, and both within the river and also terrestrial species that directly interact with the river as well. In 2022, American Rivers Organization released their annual report on the 10 most degraded rivers in the United States. And the Lower Kern River was ranked as number 7, specifically due to excessive water withdrawals. As we heard today, there is quite a history on the building of ditches and canals to extract and withdraw water from the river. Okay, and when this happens, this reduces, typically across other rivers that have been through the same situation, this reduces suitable habitat availability for wildlife and also has a negative impact on the riparian or the adjacent vegetation community. And so what you're looking at now is actually just the same area that Lois had shown in her previous talk. And so in August 23, this was a Wednesday, Friday. The 23rd was a Friday. This was our downstream site just right at Stockdale Bridge. Right upriver is the pedestrian bridge for a river walk, right above the Bellevue Weir. And so what you're looking at is about a week's difference there, before and after the rapid dewatering of the river happened. And this is the same exact location in the river, okay? And so we actually started making observations and surveying the river, planning for future research projects last summer, doing this on a weekly basis. And I didn't know the dewatering of the river was planned and was going to happen. And so this created a very interesting opportunity to explore the effects of dewatering of the river, okay, and understand how this affects the Lower Kern River ecosystem. So a couple of predictions here. One is that with the reduction of water availability in the river, the water will get warmer. Warmer water tends to hold less oxygen. So we expect that there will be less oxygen available in the water to support the wildlife that lives in the river. With a reduction in water availability, we expect there'll be a reduction in suitable habitat to support those wildlife, okay, those aquatic organisms especially, and overall that would mean that there would be a reduction in the abundance and distribution of those aquatic organisms, like aquatic macroinvertebrates, okay, and also fish. And so we have 5 sites that we sampled weekly throughout our summer season. Our most upstream site is at Hart Park. It's upstream of the major weir diversions and weirs and diversion canals that runs through town, so it serves as our control or reference site, if you will. Okay, and downstream, starting at the Beardsley Weir, we have a site downstream of that weir, downstream of the Rocky Point Weir, of the Callaway Weir, downstream of the River Canal Weir, and then downstream of the Bellevue Weir, and this is the photo I showed you just a few slides ago. And so on a weekly basis, what we did is we took a suite of measurements. We measured, for example, temperature, oxygen, salinity, pH of the water. We also measured the depth of the water at all of our sites, collect water samples to measure nutrient pollution and chemical pollution, and did a suite of wildlife observations. In the state of California, you need a scientific collector's permit to collect aquatic macroinvertebrates and also fish, and I did not have those permits, so everything is by transect and surveys, documentation. One thing that we were able to do was use eDNA. This is environmental DNA. Essentially, you collect water, you filter on a filter. This concentrates the DNA that's just available in the water. You extract that DNA, sequence it, compare the sequence to a library of known sequences for fish, and then you can identify what fish are in the river without even looking at a fish. Okay? So this was a tool used to confirm our field observations. And so our sampling timeline, it's like when there was flowing water in the river, okay? We started in July 16th, and then when dewatering happened until eventually massive parts of the river were dewatered. Data collection is still in process. I'm going to be sharing some preliminary data and observations with you today, okay? And we are still collecting data. We're out last Friday, right? Yep. So, a couple of data slides here. We're looking at depth, okay? And depth in the river follows very beautifully from our most upstream site, Hart Park, downstream to our most downstream sites. Okay, so this shows that the depth of the river is pretty consistently decreasing as you go from upstream to downstream. All right, at this point here, August 23rd, that's the last day at our Stockdale Bridge site. We had flowing continuous water in the Kern River. Okay, and so this is just to show you on the 23rd is this photo here, and then a week later on the 30th, this is exactly what it looked like. Okay, just a week later. And for reference, I'm not from California. I'm from the northeast of the United States, Pennsylvania, Jersey, and also the upper Midwest. And so this is just like, was really shocking for me to observe. Because as a freshman, I've never seen something like this happen before, okay? In terms of temperature, okay, so we got same x-axis, but temperature here. What we saw is the error bars are there. They're just so tiny. There's so little variation in measurement. They're hidden by the big symbols, mean symbols, okay? But essentially, there is a significant difference in temperature across our sites and also through time. I'm going to put some lines up there. At about 19 degrees Celsius, this is considered good, cool water temperature that supports cooler required water fish, like the rainbow trout. Okay, too far above that line, like at 24 degrees Celsius, there's a high risk for our fish health impacts. Okay, and as you can see, there's a lot of measurements well above what is considered to be acceptable levels for cooler water fish like the rainbow trout. And we have seen rainbow trout in the lower Kern River. If we focus just on this day, that red point, that's the Stockdale Bridge site. Okay, oops, looks like I deleted that next slide, but essentially that next slide was a diel pattern. So we had a sensor in there, it measured temperature every 30 minutes. Over the span of about a week, and you can see that well, this is an average, the high and the low was totally above that 24-degree level, which you would see for a warm water fish. If we average the measurements across the sites, we see that as you go from upstream, Hart Park, to downstream, there's an increase in water temperature, which is what we would expect. Now, what we're looking at here is the percent dissolved oxygen available in the water, okay? And what I want you to notice is that a lot of these measurements are above 100%. That means the water samples were oftentimes supersaturated, hypersaturated with oxygen. We see this often in freshwater systems. It's a balance of oxygen being consumed by everything that's living in there and those that are producing the oxygen, like the plants and the algae, okay? And so if we average that oxygen, we see a similar trend, okay, with a change between upstream to downstream. As we go downstream, there's a less average amount of oxygen. The percent oxygen was actually okay. All right, and where's that oxygen coming from? Well, the lower Kern River is home to many aquatic invasive plants, like floating primrose willow and water hyacinth, a forest of rooted vegetation, like curly pondweed, and there's so much aquatic plants and algae that's adding a lot more oxygen to the system than what is being consumed by the wildlife. So even more wildlife can actually be sustained in there if the water temperature is maybe a bit cooler. In terms of the macroinvertebrates, we're still in like water flowing continuously throughout the river. We observed thousands and thousands and thousands of freshwater mussels, lots of aquatic macroinvertebrates. This is a damselfly larva, it's a nymph, juvenile one. You've seen probably terrestrial dragon damselflies flying around. Okay, just pick up some woody debris and some rocks, you'll see a lot of macroinvertebrates. Okay, there's insects, there's you get your worms, you also have mayflies. It's really important to understand your macroinvertebrate community because they're honest signals of how good the water quality is. Some macroinvertebrates are very sensitive to pollution, so if you have a lot of those in your system, this is an indicator that you have high quality water. Okay, and so I'm getting the permit from the state to do a proper sampling of this to better characterize that feature of the river, hopefully when water comes back. We also observed quite a bit of fish. These are a bit murky because they're underwater photos. Okay, most of the fish that we saw when water was running through the river were bass, of sunfish, mosquito fish, and I would say those are the most dominant ones that we had saw. All right. Now, also while water was running through the river in the summertime, water was slowly being reduced at our sites. That would expose the vented part of the river, and it would create these little refugia pools. Okay, and in those pools were trapped wildlife like fish, okay, and tadpoles. The water is too warm and too low in oxygen for that to be sustained, okay, because now it's disconnected from the flow of the river. All right, so August 23rd, that's our last measurement at Stockdale Bridge of flowing water, okay? Just a few days after that, I had a meeting with some folks out at the River Walk, and what we observed was upstream of the pedestrian bridge, lots of water. Downstream, looked like there was almost no water. There was a trickle of water. So this is zoomed out more. Upstream, quite a bit of water, and then here's the pedestrian bridge, okay, and you got the weir underneath, and downstream of this weir, it was very dry. There was a trickle of water on the far left side, which then supported these deep refugia pools that we see right there. Okay, so there's a video taken with my cell phone. Sorry, so fast. I'm not used to taking like videos to show other people. Okay, but that's looking upstream towards the Belvier Weir. Now I'm panning. I'm going to towards where we saw a bunch of these stranded fish, and so water would piddle out. It was like a slip and slide. Okay, fish were like coming in, and there was like inches of deep water. Then it got very shallow very quickly, and then they got stranded. Okay, and so we counted over 40 stranded fish, and these were, freshly stranded, and some of them were still alive, and we observed stranded, like right when I was doing the video. Okay, and so we also observed other critters that had died, like crayfish, okay, and also frogs. And so on Wednesday the 28th, okay, that was that deep refugia pool. Friday, this was like 8 o'clock at night, okay? And then like 7 a.m. on Friday, all right, this is what that same exact spot looked like. There was no more flowing water, and pretty much all of that water, disappeared. I was gonna be like, it's not gonna take 5 minutes again, is it? Okay. Oh no. I'll jump ahead. Okay. Friday, Lois actually joined us, and that was the first day actually, like, not even we talked on the phone a couple times before that. She came in the field with us, and we showed up, and she saw our raw reactions to mass death of fish. There were over 400 dead fish, and we're not talking just like the little juveniles you saw in the previous video, but of like channel catfish that were like this big. Giant sized bass and carp, okay? And they're still trying to breathe even though there's no water, okay? This is that refugio pool, was about 15 centimeters deep, had very little oxygen, and is very crowded with carp fish. All other fish taxa species in that pond, refugio pool, were dead. Okay, and so they're literally like shoulder to shoulder in there, if you will. Now that was Friday. Now on the next day, Saturday, we had already planned to do a fish transect survey along the Visa, the Bakersfield Environmental Studies area. So here we've got Coffee Road, okay, SJV is down here. So this whole area, this is the Visa, the Bakersfield Environmental Studies area. It's about 1.5 river miles long, okay? And so Lois came out along with other faculty, students, and alumni from the biology department to help do a fish transect survey. And water was flowing through this part of the river. Okay, it was low, but water was flowing, and it was deep enough that in parts I could swim and do my normal snorkeling in the river. Okay, and so we have our transect, people walking across the river, making observations, conferring with others, writing our data down. Okay, and so, for example, we have these little divots in the benthic part of the river, and these are juvenile bass that are kind of in there schooling together, has less drag, so less energy. I point that out because I'm going to show you a photo of what it looks like a week later, okay? We get all the way up to the weir, and it has a trickle of water. It's hard to see, I think, on this big picture so far away from the screen. But weeks prior to that, it looked like a cascade, like a waterfall, all right? And so that was Saturday. Now, 4 days later, on Wednesday, I go out there with a couple of folks, and now that Visa looks like this. It's marsh habitat. This is a deep refugio pool that was about at least 12 feet deep. I was snorkeling here quite a bit. This is where we actually saw the rainbow trout, okay? And we saw fish that had died, and so we started documenting. So this here, it's hard to see these big ones, but all these little silver, those are also fish too. There's like over 100 fish in this photo. Okay, and so that was Wednesday, okay, and so very rapidly I was like, new fish transect survey, we need to survey, they're going to die, they can't swim away, so we can get more data, but it's going to go, the water's going away very rapidly. So we very quickly put another team together, that was fantastic, and we did the survey again, and this is what it looked like. This is 7 days later. Okay, we did our live fish transect survey, water deep enough to swim and snorkel in parts of it, and now there's no flowing water at the Visa at all. This is what it looks like. And of course there are piles and piles of dead fish. Those are those juvenile bass that was in that little divot, and here are the divots right here, and the little dark brown that you can see, those are juvenile dead bass. The water evaporated so quickly, created probably these little, I think, miniature refugio pools. They had nowhere to go and they died. And so what we're doing during these surveys is we find the fish, we put our meter stick down, we take pictures. There are hundreds of pictures, and we documented over 3,000 dead fish. That's a low estimate. We could not document everything because there was so much fish, and we only had so much time to do the survey. So there's a student in my lab who is working on measuring all the length of all these fish with a computer program. And so some of the fish have been dead for a couple days, some were glistening. So literally there's probably water in that very shallow pool that these fish were in, probably like a few hours before we got there to take this photo, okay? And so this is the video I have shown you before. So we did stumble across, okay, or discover these very shallow refugio pools in the Visa where hundreds and hundreds of fish are trapped, okay? And not just the fish, there's other wildlife that was trapped in there too, okay? So for example, like tadpoles. And so, to remind you, Wednesday, this is that deep snorkeling pool where we started to notice the rapid watering of the Visa, okay? And then Friday we went out, this is the same spot. There's no river flow at all. This is a cormorant, and he was very happy to be right in there, fish in a barrel. He's just diving down, getting fish the whole time I'm snorkeling in there, trying to see how many fish are left in there, okay? And he occupied that refugio pool basically until he could not no more. Okay, So what we're looking at here is a table summary of the taxa that we observed and was detected with the eDNA. So here's the common name, okay? An X means we saw it, possibly means I think I saw it and identified. So for example, sculpin, I was pretty sure I saw a sculpin. Here's this, riffle sculpin. But it was partially degraded already. But what was really interesting is that the genus got picked up in the eDNA. So I feel confirmed that my uncertainty is like more confirmed, okay? A couple that we saw did not get picked up, like the crappie and the rainbow trout. Just because they get picked up in the eDNA doesn't mean it's not there. You have to have a lot of environmental data floating and available in the water for it to be detected. These taxa are there, we have seen them. Their population just is probably so low, there's not enough DNA to be detected right at the moment we sampled. Okay, the eDNA did add a new taxa that we did not observe in the field, and that's redfin shad. So that's pretty cool. Something else that we also observed is the buildup and accumulation of anthropogenic litter or human trash. So as well as being a freshwater ecologist, I studied microplastic and trash in the environment, and terrestrial and aquatic, and I work with the state also to do this. And so we actually have a paper in peer review right now for publication studying trash in the Kern River from a study back in 2019. And we're working on developing a new project to study the current trash. Okay, and so as the water was receding, as you would expect, the people that live along the river migrated, okay, with the receding waters. Now, what we also saw is that some of those people were not as environmentally conscientious as other people part of that community, and they would collect items in a new location and then abandon it and then move upriver again as the river kept receding. We also saw increase of just dumping, okay, right there along the river and in the river itself. So this is something we're going to explore moving forward. So to summarize, before, in the summertime when there was running water through the river, we had a diversity of habitats with these riffle, pool, and run habitats, which supported a diverse aquatic wildlife. And then when dewatering of the river happened, okay, this resulted in a less suitable habitat, less water, okay, which resulted in mass death of wildlife. Again, over 3,000. That's a very conservative number. I just can't emphasize that enough. Okay, and then today it just looks like this, and major sections, reaches of the Kern River. Okay, so next steps, we are still monitoring the river. We're doing it on a monthly basis now instead of a weekly basis. Okay, we're also working on community engagement and science communication. So for example, we've been participated a couple of weekends ago on the Kern River March. Okay, we also have a Kern River education booth at the second annual festival on May 10th for anyone who's interested. If you want to have a booth there, let me know. I can send you the sign-up form. Okay, so I highly recommend you attend that. Okay, among other events for outreach and science communication. Also, we're very interested in river restoration. These folks, River Partners is an organization, they actually have money to develop a restoration plan for the Kern River, but they need money to actually enact that, and they're doing that by developing their plan by talking to scientists, local individuals who are interested in organizations as well. And then also we can look to other rivers in California that have gone through a similar challenges and actually won water rights back to go through, or the ability to have water go through parts of their river. And so that could be a really good reference as we continue to develop and study the river. So with that, I would like to thank all of the wonderful students, faculty, and alumni that helped and collect all the data and help with all the field work, as well as citizens who like email or text me, hey, this is happening, can you go check it out, and whatnot. It's helpful because we've learned new things. And then I actually have like basically no funding for this. This is all like pretty much volunteer, all right? But a couple entities, so Water Audit California paid for the fish eDNA samples, and I've also used some teaching funds to do more of this with my classes, and a little bit of CSU Coast funding to help support my lead undergrad student, Andrew Alba, which is him right there, he's sitting over there, okay? And of course, all of my resources here at CSUV. So thank you for your attention. Please find me if you have questions, you want to talk later. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you.
That was
Oh, there's that slide.
There's the missing slide. That's fascinating and depressing. But we do have time left if you have questions for any of our speakers today. And we'll acknowledge students first if there are students in the audience. Yes.
So if there's, Lake Isabella's in full pool, why don't we just release water from Lake Isabella all through the summer? It's obvious.
No idea, but.
That's not me, that's these two people right here.
Yeah, understand.
Okay, so Lake Isabella is full, and why don't they go ahead and release water? That's assuming there's vertical operations, meaning full equals full.
It doesn't have to be full, you
Yeah,
can release water all the time.
Because the water districts and the city that own rights to the river also own capacity in Lake Isabella. Lake Isabella like a big layer cake, right? At the bottom is 30,000 acre feet that's actually, they kind of call it dead pool, it's a silly name, but they call it dead pool. It's owned by the county. That remains in Lake Isabella no matter what. I don't think they can actually get it out because the outtakes are too high to get that 30,000 acre feet out. And then beyond that, all the capacity, the storage capacity is owned by City of Bakersfield, Kern County Water Agency, Kern Delta, and North Kern Water Storage District. Rosedale does not own any storage. Anyway, so they want to hold on to that water in the case of drought, because that happens quite a bit. And so they like to mostly just take the natural computed flow out of that comes in from the North Fork, and if they want to keep a certain amount stored, and they want to keep some of that water flowing down to First Point and use that for irrigation. So that's what's happening right now.
So do they have water rights to the water in behind the dam? Oh, that doesn't make any sense.
They own it. They own the storage capacity. The Army Corps of Engineers owns and operates the dam. The storage behind the dam, that space, is owned by the water districts, which helped pay to build the dam, and also, by the way, helped pay to do the recent renovations.
So Lois, you know if that's true for like the Klamath Dam? They don't know. Who owns the water,
Really
This doesn't make any sense.
You know how long it's taken me to amass information about that Kern system?
Well, what's right for one is right for the other.
No, because this is an Army Corps of Engineers dam. It's built for flood control, and there's Bureau of Reclamation dams. Then there's, like, on the Merced Irrigation District actually owns the dam, and then I think that Klamath is owned by Bureau of Reclamation, but I'm not sure. So they all have different operating procedures.
Are these the Klamath dams that were removed? Is that? Yeah. Well, those were private power company dams, and they were run of the river dams. They weren't storage. They just, the reservoir was just there to run the turbines.
That's a big debate happening on the Russian River right now. PG&E is giving up anyway, that's a whole different can of worms. But irrigation is why.
Any other questions? I had one about this business of you have to have a project. Like, you can't claim this water if you're not using it, you lose it, and if you can't claim you have a project you're losing, you might not be able to claim that water. So is having fish and wildlife
No.
not a project?
No.
That's what the courts are.
Right, okay, sorry, she's talking about the basic contract water. When the city bought the water in 1977, it sold bonds to pay for the water, and to pay off those bonds, it sold a certain amount of water to North Kern Water Storage District, which is an irrigation district, and they paid, and those contracts were up in 2012. And so the city said, oh, we're gonna take that water back and run it down the river, and North Kern said, no, you're not, and sued, and a Ventura County judge said, based on the contract, you have to read these contracts. This is how water law in California works. I love it when people come up and go, oh, I want to hear about water in California. It's like, which water, which system, which contract? It's in the fine print. And in the contract, it says, we're gonna sell you this water under long-term contracts until we have a project for it. And how is a project defined? And I think they gave a loose definition of it, and it didn't include, like, just having a river. Yeah, so the judge said, well, read the contract, it's not in there, so it's not a project. You can't just run the water down the river.
But the contract was up.
Doesn't matter. It says, we're gonna sell you this water under contract until we have a project. You don't have a project. They don't argue with me, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just telling you what I've reported, I feel like I should.
I'm not arguing, trying to get it out in the open.
Maureen?
Well, this is related to your comments. So historically, there were these two rights, the rights to water if you have land but in the rivers.
Riparian.
And the riparian, and then the right to move water through a canal.
Appropriate, yes.
When did the right to dam the river and create a reservoir for future purpose happen?
Well, that was a flood control issue on this river. That's a flood control issue. So almost everybody downstream wanted that dam. And they begged and pleaded and lobbied the Congress to do it. And at the time, in the 40s and 50s, there was kind of a race to build dams between the Bureau of Reclamation, which is under the Department of Interior, and the Army Corps of Engineers, which is all about flood control. There was a race, and Boswell actually wanted the Bureau of Reclamation to do it, but it ended up being the Army Corps of Engineers. So it was a flood
But if there's
control.
no flood risk, how can you justify keeping the water dammed?
But there is flood risk on every single one of these rivers.
Well, the risk is always there, but now they can control that risk with the dams.
Right.
Why doesn't the water flow when there's no risk of flood?
Because when they built the dam, Congress said, you gotta pony up, you gotta put skin in the game. So the water districts put skin in the game, so they own storage. So they own that storage, they control that water and they own that storage. So the Army Corps of Engineers can operate the dam based on flood control safety when the water gets up to a certain level, and it's like during winter, and they know that the snowpack is gonna potentially, then the Army Corps of Engineers basically takes complete control and says, we're gonna release this much for this long until the safety issue is ameliorated. Until that point, the water districts own and control basically how that water comes out. And in fact, on all the rivers, there's a water master, because there's like 5 different owners, right? The Army Corps of Engineers isn't one of the 5 different yahoos telling them, release this water, no, do this, do that. So 5 different districts appoint a water master, who is right now, the Kern River water master is Art Chianello. We've only had 4, he's the 4th. And he communicates to the Army Corps of Engineers based on those rights, and it didn't go into the Shaw Decree, which just gets like super confusing, but based on all those rights, and the water district's coming to Art Chianello saying, this is how much water we want, and this is when we want it, he basically writes that down and takes that grocery list to the Army Corps of Engineers, and they then respond to that. Does that make sense?
Lois, can you speak to the authority that President Trump might have had when he opened the gates of Korea and success to dump water?
The Army Corps of Engineers is a branch of the military, which reports to the Commander-in-Chief. And he made his executive order, which said that all federal organizations, including the Army Corps of Engineers, will exert all efforts to get water down to the fires in LA. So, and I have a public records request into the Army Corps of Engineers to find out like what the actual chain of argument was, or where it came from, or how it got to the Army. Why did the Army Corps of Engineers, did they volunteer to do this? I don't know. But so the Army Corps of Engineers said, oh, these 2 lakes are, remember I said the Army Corps of Engineers can take over complete control of the water and the operations of those dams once that water reaches a certain level, and it's during the winter, because they are in charge of absolute flood control. So those were, both of those lakes were they had encroached into the flood control space. So typically, though, the Army Corps of Engineers will continue to hold that water there because they know that people are hedging against a dry year, and in January, it was a horribly dry January, so they were holding as much water into those lakes. There wasn't a runoff. Even if all the runoff had come down immediately, it wouldn't have filled up, even half of the remaining space. But technically, that water was encroaching. That water was absolutely under the Army Corps of Engineers control. It doesn't mean it's owned, because once they release that water, it goes to the actual owners, who don't have to adhere to anyone's orders except their own. That means if Trump would have come in with guns, they would have gone, no, this is our water. No. it's not going, and getting into LA, which could happen, I won't bore you with the details, but it would take a lot of permits and a lot of money. That answer your question? As the Kauai Delta Conservation, let's see, the Kauai Delta, I can't remember the name of it, one of the water agencies that own that water, the chairman of the board, during one of their public meetings said, I wonder if he knows how badly he effed up, and he used the full-on word, and we were like, yes, sorry.
So last question, because we're just a little past
So
the
last question, okay, yeah, that's actually a good last question. So what do you think, based on what you learned, would be happening on December 10th? Violating the public trust doctrine and pushing game code 5927 goes without punishment, right? So what kind of new tenets can the attorneys who are suing the city bring up that we might get the river back? Is there any chance? So what do you think?
That 5th District Court of Appeals ruling was, if not the nail in the coffin, a really strong nail in the coffin, I think, of that case. Now, the attorneys that are suing said that, we're gonna win, we're gonna keep fighting, all that kind of stuff, but I don't know how much of that is, basically, come on guys, we gotta go over we gotta get out of the trench and go face it, and how much of it was that, or how much of it is really, they really do have the law on their side. I mean, that 5th District Court, you've gotta read it. It's disheartening for anybody. Now, that doesn't mean that there can't be a deal made. I've been saying since 2007, since I was a columnist, that the Kern River guys are the best people in the world at making deals. From Miller Hagen on, they've made deals over this water. And there is plumbing. There's the two canals that go on either side of the river, the Cross Valley Canal and the River Canal. There are turnouts that go into both, back and forth. There is actually a negative declaration that the Kern County Water Agency did in 2000 that said this is how we're going to, when they bought the river rights, they actually built, with public money, they built those turnouts and wells, and they said this is how we're going to do it. We're going to borrow water from whoever, Coelho can put some water in, or this guy can put some water in, or this district. We'll run water down the river up to a certain CFS, and in dry years it'll be less, and in wet years it could be more. And then if we need it, we can account for that water, because that's the other thing they're great at, is they follow every drop. Then they could use those parkway wells that we pay for, Proposition 13 money, that's our money. Then we can pump it into the Cross Valley Canal, and that canal can take it to the Bryant Canal, that can take it to the Beers Leader, we can take it up and down the river to be delivered wherever. So they could make a deal, and I fervently hope that they would, because I don't think a judge is going to be able to make a deal that's going to be helpful. But I just don't see with that ruling. I mean, it's not just the bond issue; it's also that they said before you can do an injunction to say how much water should flow for fish, you got to say how much water should flow for fish. Now, that's a fight in and of itself, right? That's dueling scientists for God knows how long, and appeals. How much water is good to keep fish in good condition? Your definition is different than mine, and I'm going to pay as many experts as you're going to pay to argue. So I say there should be a deal made, but who am I?
And the lawyers win.
And the lawyers win.
I hope that you'll avail yourself of other Public History Institute programming that we hope will carry on despite budget cuts and so on that we're facing. But we really appreciate your coming out today, and please join me in thanking our three speakers for really interesting.